What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Android format video. And in this video, I'm going to be going over a very strong deck from a previous format, which is Burn. Now, this Burn deck is pretty much the same as the Burn deck that I actually played in Imperial format. I just made a slight change, switching out one Sangan for a Magic Cylinder, because Sangan got limited and Magic Cylinder is a pretty decent Burn card that got introduced. But other than that, the list is basically the same. But before I dive into exactly what this list is and what it's trying to do, if you're not already subscribed, please do subscribe. We're at just over 620 subscribers now, which is pretty exciting, especially given that, we just had the 1-year anniversary of my channel. So awesome to have reached 620 or so subscribers in 1 year. And in this second year, I'm just hoping we can reach bigger and better things. So definitely subscribe if you want to see where this channel goes. I've got a lot more fun videos planned, diving more into Android and other old retro formats. So look forward to those. Also, if you want to play any of the formats that I feature in these videos for yourself, then we have a Discord server, link will be in the description down below, but it's a great place to find games in these obscure and underexplored formats. We also hold monthly tournaments there, and this month's tournament will be an Imperial format, which is very, very similar to Android format. So if you like the Android duels that I'm showing off, then head on over there and sign up for the tournament. And lastly, if you enjoyed the video, as always, please do leave a like down below. It really helps out a lot. But with all that out of the way, let's dive in to this Burn deck. So as I said, this is basically the same Burn deck as it was in Imperial format. And I think that this deck is similarly strong to how it was in Imperial. It did get a little bit weaker in my opinion, which I'll explain my reasoning for after I sort of show off the games. But I think that overall this deck is still very strong. It can still take games. So starting off with the deck breakdown, going through the monsters, we've got a Cannon Soldier, which is great at just getting a lot of burn damage out of nowhere, which can be a very strong game finisher. We've got Cyberjar, which can act as a defensive option to get rid of your opponent's offensive pressure, and also potentially deal with Jinzo, which this deck does have a big problem dealing with. Of course, we're also playing Jinzo because Jinzo is basically 2400 damage that your opponent can't really stop on our turn if they don't have any monsters on field. So this I kind of view as a big burn spell, and so we are playing a copy of it. We've also got 3 Giant Germ and 3 Nimble Momonga. These are great at both swarming the field, deck thinning, and also doing life point manipulation. Momonga gains you life points, and Giant Germ costs your opponent life points, and both of these are very useful to do. Next up, we've got Maneater Bug, which is a very good flip effect monster that can be used to pop things like Jinzo. It can also be brought back from your graveyard with things like Spear Cretin, which is a very powerful flip monster in this format. Spear Cretin lets you get back flip monsters from your graveyard, like Maneater Bug and Cyberjar, and it also lets you potentially get back things like Giant Germ or Momonga to gain yourself more life points, or just set up a Spear Cretin loop, getting back a Spear Cretin with Spear Cretin to just prevent your opponent from actually being able to hit you directly. Next up, we've got 3 Mystic Tomatoes, which can be used to fetch out things like Giant Germ, as well as Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest, which are both majorly good recruiters in this format, being able to get pretty much any monster you want from deck to hand, given which one you go into. So these are very, very important. Moving on to the spells, we've got 3 Chain Energy, which is really, I think, the best card in this deck. Yes, there is a lot of spell and trap removal in this format, but I do think that just being able to set up some Chain Energies early in the game can just be devastating for your opponent. Even if they do spell and trap removal, it's still costing them 500 life points, which is pretty nice. Next up, we've got Change of Heart, which is an incredibly powerful limited spell, alongside Dark Hole, Monster Reborn, Raigeki, and Pot of Greed, the original Power 5. All of these are still incredibly good in this deck. We've got only 2 of the hand rips, Confiscation and Forceful Sentry. The reasoning for this is that Delinquent Duo is not as effective in a deck like this, as this deck is just trying to slow down your opponent's gameplay. And so what you really care about is getting rid of things like Mystical Space Typhoon and Heavy Storm, as opposed to just depriving your opponent of card advantage in general. Also, the 1000 life point cost on Duo is a bit much. Yes, that cost is on Confiscation as well, but I do think the hand knowledge and the choice of what to take out of their hand is very important. So that's why we're only playing 2 of the hand rips here. And deck space is rather tight in this deck, as you really want every card you draw to be pretty useful. In terms of spell and trap removal of our own, we've got 3 Mystical Space Typhoon to get rid of our opponent's problematic spells and traps. We don't really want to play something like Heavy Storm in this deck, given that a large portion of our game plan is just sitting on things like Chain Energy. So we want to preserve that as much as possible. We've also got a painful choice to get into our combo pieces more or load up our graveyard for Spear Cretin. Moving on to the traps, we've got a Call of the Haunted, which is just a very good revival trap in this format. Being able to revive something like Jinzo can be very strong, or just reviving something like a Giant Germ can be nice as well. We've got Ceasefire and 3 Just Desserts to serve a very similar purpose of just dealing a ton of damage to your opponent out of nowhere. Yes, these can't be activated when Jinzo's on the field, but oftentimes if your opponent's able to get Jinzo to stick on the field for a long period of time anyways, you're just going to lose the game. So the goal is just to remove your opponent's Jinzo and then potentially activate these when you've got a good chance to. We've also got an Imperial Order to shut down our opponent's spell and trap removal. We've got a Magic Cylinder to stop their aggressive pressure and also deal a ton of damage out of nowhere potentially. And we've got a Mirror Force to stop their aggressive pressure in their tracks. For the side deck, we've got an additional Maneater Bug if we need a bit more removal, 3 Princess of Tsurugi if our opponent's playing a more back row focused strategy, 1 Delinquent Duo in case we know we're going first, we can side into this potentially, just to have another hand rip card in the opener. We've got 3 Dust Tornado to act as even more spell and trap removal in case we're going up against another deck that values back row. We've got 3 Magic Jammer and 3 Solemn Judgment to shut down our opponent's strategies a little bit more. And we've got 1 Skull Lair if we need the continuous removal. I think that there are potentially other changes that you can make with this deck. For instance, you could maybe put in some Jars of Greed to more consistently draw into things like Chain Energy. But I think that as is, the deck is pretty decent. I think after playing some games with it, there are some minor changes that I may make, but I'll discuss those after diving into the match that I played with this. So let's dive into that now. Okay, we've got a game against Soul65 here. We are playing Burn, unclear what they're playing, but always a pleasure to have them on the channel. They're a very frequent guest. We are going to start off by throwing rock. They tie our rock. We do paper, not scissors, and they tie that. And unfortunately, we go back to rock, and we lose the rock, paper, scissors. So unfortunately, we will be going second here. Oh, and this would be a great going first hand, but let's just hope they don't have a hand rip to take away that Pot of Greed. Oh, unfortunately, they've got a Pot of Greed of their own, so they're going to draw 2 here. They're going to fire a Confiscation. That's kind of rough. So they're probably going to take the Pot of Greed. Oh, they're actually going to send back Cannon Soldier. That's interesting. So they're going to send the Cannon Soldier to grave here. And that's why they did that. They've got a Forceful Sentry. So this will be able to send back the pot. And now we're in a very tough spot. We don't have any monsters to bring out. All we've got is Ceasefire and Mystical Space Typhoon. They're just going to set 2 and pass. We draw Mirror Force, which is pretty decent. Now we have a couple different options here. I think either way, we just want to fire the Mystical Space Typhoon first because they likely have a Mystical Space Typhoon of their own set. We just want to do this now, and it is indeed a Mystical Space Typhoon of their own. Now we have a couple options here. We can either, I guess we could commit all our back row to board. But if we do that, then that's playing into Heavy Storm a little bit. We could commit to firing a Ceasefire in their standby phase next turn, just to clear up whatever their set monster is, in case they set a Magician of Faith. But we know that they know that we have a Ceasefire, so we feel like they probably didn't set a Magician of Faith turn 1. I mean, maybe they weren't expecting us to blind MST their back row, but it's still a bit of a risky play to make. So I'm actually not going to go for the Ceasefire. I'm just going to set a Mirror Force and pass and try and bluff like this is a Ceasefire. So that way they maybe commit more aggressive pressure to board and we can clear away their monsters. Let's see if this pays off for me though. I'm just going to give them the thumbs up to let them know that I don't Ceasefire here. And unfortunately, they flip up Magician of Faith. So this is a pretty big brain play because they know that we know that they know that we've got a Ceasefire. So they figure that we would not expect that they would actually set Magician of Faith into Ceasefire. And in doing that, it's kind of like 5-dimensional chess going on here. But that's, occasionally you just got to take these risks. And I think that it would pay off either way because even if we Ceasefired a Magician of Faith, they're still in a fine spot, right? They've got more cards than us. We don't have any monsters, so they can get aggressive here. So I think that this makes sense a lot for them. And given that we didn't Ceasefire them, they've got a really big opportunity here. They'll grab back this Pot of Greed, and they're going to fire that. So they are going to be able to draw 2 here. They're going to bring out a Gemini Elf and attack in for 2,200. We could Mirror Force this, but given that we don't have any monsters to follow that up with, I don't really think Mirror Forcing is the best move yet. We can save the Mirror Force for a little bit later and they're just going to set one and pass back to us. Giant Germ is a pretty good one. We'll set that, pass back to them. If they attack into the Germ, then we can get out 2 more and potentially tribute over 1 for Jinzo next turn. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. They are going to switch the Magician of Faith to defense and attack into our Germ here. We are going to get 2 Germs from our deck, and they're going to take 500 points of damage. So we feel pretty good about that. And they're just going to pass back to us. Spear Cretin's okay, but not really good right now. We're just going to tribute off the Germ for a Jinzo, attack over that Gemini Elf, and attack into their Magician of Faith with our Germs. We've cleared their board away. And we've also got a Mirror Force if they are able to get rid of the Jinzo. So we feel pretty good about this. We're going to pass back to them. And they've got Dark Hole, so that will clear our board away here. Oh, they've got Reborns. This will be able to bring back the Jinzo. Oh, and this is really bad. Spear Cretin's actually really bad in this situation because they can just get back Magician of Faith with it. Oh, this is not good. An Imperial Order is not going to help. We're going to set the Spear Cretin either way just to get back a body to block with, but oh, this is not looking good. They are going to summon up Bazoo and banish a bunch here. Hopefully they banish the Magician of Faith. That would be very nice. And they do. Okay, so they're not going to be able to get back a monster with the Spear Cretin there. But they do have Change of Heart for that, so that will just be the end of the game there. And oof. That was a rough one. Now, to be fair, our opponent did draw a bunch of Hand Rips and Pot of Greed, and we're able to loop that Pot of Greed. So maybe we weren't winning that either way. But maybe if I had fired the Ceasefire earlier to prevent them from getting the +1 off of Pot of Greed, maybe they wouldn't have had so many powerful spells that they could have used to dismantle our board in that way. So, you know, who knows what would have happened otherwise. But going into game 2, I don't really think we make any changes here as we're still going first, so we'll keep in the Hand Rips. But I feel like as long as we're going first and don't get hand ripped in the opener, I think we should be okay. Kind of a shame, though, that game 1 didn't really get to show off the strategy too much. But we're going to go into game 2 here, and we are going to go first. So, oh, this is a really good opener here, actually. We did draw 2 Giant Germs, which is kind of rough. But I feel pretty good about this otherwise. We're going to set the Mamanga, set the Imperial Order, and then activate Chain Energy here. We could have set the Just Desserts too, probably. If they've got Heavy Storm, we're firing Imperial Order, probably. But, I don't know. I feel fine just keeping the Desserts in hand. Maybe that will come back to bite me later. But they're just going to pay 5, bring out a Sangan here. And they're going to attack into our set. It's Mamanga, so we'll be able to bring out 2 more Mamangas and gain 1,000. And this is why the life point gain on Mamanga is pretty good, because when you've got Chain Energy up, getting that extra 1,000 life points can be very nice at sort of getting you more activations and sets of your cards. So we get out 2 more Mamangas. They're going to pay 1,500 to activate Confiscation. So again, maybe this is a sign that we should have set Just Desserts, as then we'd have it on field, and they'd be forced to send one of our Germs. But as is, the choice here is pretty clear. They're going to take the Desserts and leave us with just 2 Giant Germs in hand. Still isn't the worst, though. They're going to set one pass back to us. And I still feel pretty good about this situation. We're going to pay 5 to bring out a Germ, and that's fine by them. We're going to flip up a Mamanga. And thank goodness they don't have Torrential Tribute. That would be really bad here, as they could just Torrential our entire board away. But as is, we'll be able to get a pretty good turn here. We don't flip up the other Mamanga in case they've got a Mirror Force. But luckily, it doesn't look like they do. So we're going to crash our Germ into their Sangan. They will get a search off this, which is pretty worrying. They're going to grab a Witch. But we'll be able to get in 2,000 damage here. So we're going to do that. And now they're done at 3,000. And they pay 500 each time they activate a card. So we feel pretty good about this. We're going to pass back to them. And they are going to think about this for a bit. And they're going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon on our Chain Energy. Now, we actually have a bit of a choice here. We could either let that Mystical Space Typhoon go through and let the Chain Energy die, or we can activate Imperial Order, preventing the Chain Energy from being destroyed. Now, if we do activate the Imperial Order, then they'll be able to do this turn without having to pay for Chain Energy, since Chain Energy's effect will be negated. But we will be able to have it online for future turns. So, you know, we might want to keep it around, even if they'll get a free turn this turn. It's a bit iffy. I think we do actually want to fire the Imperial Order to preserve the Chain Energy, as they are at low enough life points where it could actually matter. So they're just going to set 2 for free and pass back to us. Just Search is a pretty good draw. We're just going to let that Imperial Order die. We're going to switch our monsters to defense, and then set a Just Search, paying 500 for that, and passing back to them. They're going to think about this a bit, and they're going to really think for a bit. They're going to pay 5 to bring out Jinzo, which will turn off our Just Desserts, unfortunately. But, you know, they're low enough where we might not need it. They will be able to get a search off of which here they're going to grab a Bazoo. And they're going to get in over the Mamanga. Makes sense. This way they don't take more damage there. And they're just going to pass back to us. We draw Reborn, which is pretty decent. But we don't really want to use it yet. We're going to think about exactly what to do here, and we are going to pay 500 and set another Germ. Now, if they've got like Raigeki or something, this is obviously pretty bad for us, but we can always use the Spear Cretin to get back things like Germ later. And the Germ isn't really getting too much value in our hand here. They're going to think a bit about this, and they're going to summon out a Kaiku, which could be pretty bad for us, especially going into Spear Cretin, because, you know, if they banish certain monsters from our grave and we want to Spear Cretin stuff back, then Kaiku is obviously a problem. They're going to attack in to our Mamanga with the Kaiku, and so we'll gain 1,000, which is nice. And we draw another Chain Energy. Now, this is a bit of an interesting decision here, as we could get pretty aggressive. They're at 2,000 life points, and we have 2 Germs on field and 1 Germ in graveyard. So what we could do is we could Reborn the Germ in our graveyard and crash all 3 of our Germs into their monsters, dropping them down to 500 life points. With a Chain Energy on the field, this means that they can't activate any cards from their hand. So we feel pretty good about that. And I think that is what we are going to do. We're going to think about this for a bit, and we are going to just go for it. It may be a bit risky, but we're going to do it anyways. We're going to bring out Giant Germ, switch our other Giant Germs to attack. We're actually going to crash into the Kaiku here. The reason for this is that ultimately we only need to wind up with 1 Giant Germ in grave to bring back off Spear Cretin after this line. And in case they've got some way to clear our Spear Cretin after we set it, like if their set card is like a Nobleman of Crossout or Raigeki, then we want to have as many life points left as possible. So we are just going to go into the Kaiku instead. And maybe this is, you know, a bit greedy for us, but I think it's ultimately fine. And if even if they've got like a Raigeki or a Nobleman of Crossout or something, I still feel like we're in a pretty good spot after this turn. So I'm not too worried about this. And we do end up with 1 Giant Germ in grave. Main 2, we're going to set a Spear Cretin, and we're also going to activate this additional copy of Chain Energy just in case their set is a Mystical Space Typhoon. So we're going to pass back to them, and this is the moment of truth. This could be really bad for us if that set is like a Nobleman of Crossout or Raigeki. Then we basically would have 1 turn left, given that, you know, they can fire it and then attack in for 4,200, dropping us down to 1,400, which would give us 1 activation left off of the double Chain Energy here. So it's a bit risky, but I felt like this was a risk that we had to take. And it looks like they're just going to attack in, which basically does mean that this is the end of the game. We'll get back a Giant Germ in face-down defense position. We can always just crash that in to the Jinzo next turn because the Jinzo already attacked. And main 2, they're just going to pass back to us, so that will be the end of the game. What was this set? That was just an Imperial Order, which is useless as is. So we draw Raigeki on top of this, so we could go for that. But we're just going to crash our Germ, I think. Yep, and that is indeed what we're going to do. Just in case that their set was like a Mirror Force or something, we don't want to turn Jinzo offline there. So that's going to be the end of the game. And I thought that the game 2 actually showed how devastating this deck can be. Having Chain Energy online can really put your opponent into very tough situations, and it can just wrap up the game on its own. So even if you've just got 1, you know, it's obviously better if you're stacking Chain Energies and really putting the screws on your opponent, but the deck's got enough ways to pressure your opponent that ultimately is pretty fine. So game 2 went a lot better. Going to game 3, I think we side out the hand drips since we are going second. I think we probably replace them with a Man-Eater Bug and maybe a Princess of Tsurugi, I think, as well. But I don't quite remember. We'll see if any of that comes up in the games here, though. We are going to be going second, as we did win the second game here. And let's hope they don't hand rip us as devastatingly as the first game. They're going to just start with a summoned Gemini Alpha to set back row and pass back to us. So we feel pretty good about this. We're just going to fire this Mystical Space Typhoon on the back row, just in case. But they've got a Dust Tornado, so they'll be able to destroy our Mystical Space Typhoon and set an additional card here. And that's a bit worrying for us, as it's very likely that that's a Mystical Space Typhoon that they can then use on whatever back row we set. So we're going to make it seem like we have multiple options here and just do the thinking emoji. To pretend like we're choosing between which spell and trap cards to set, setting potentially the one that works best if they've got a Mystical Space Typhoon. But we've just got the one Ceasefire, so we'll set this Giant Germ, set the Ceasefire, and pass back to them. They are going to think about this for a bit, just set one and attack into our Giant Germ. So we'll be able to get out 2 more Giant Germs here, and they'll take 500, so we feel pretty good about this. Main 2, they're just going to pass back to us. We feel pretty good about that. We're just going to switch our Germs to defense, set this Mystic Tomato as well, and pass back to them. Mystic Tomato can search as something like a Sangan or a Witch, which would be pretty nice. And they're going to Change of Heart, target Giant Germ instead of our set. This is very interesting. This likely means that they've either got a Cannon Soldier or a Jinzo, given that they want to just get rid of a card that deals them damage. So if they've got a Jinzo in hand, we might want to fire the Ceasefire now just to get 2,000 damage in while we can. But if that Jinzo manages to stick on field for a long time, then we kind of lose the game either way. So I feel like it's best just to hold the Ceasefire here. So that's what we're going to do. They will indeed Change of Heart, fire a Jar of Greed off of the Giant Germ there, or off of the back row there. And they're going to bring out a Jinzo. So kind of unfortunate we won't be able to use Ceasefire here, but hopefully we can search out something with the Sangan or Witch that we search off this Tomato. So we're going to bring out a Sangan indeed. They're just going to pass back to us here. We draw just desserts, which does not help us here. We're going to switch these Sangan to defense, set a Mystic Tomato here to potentially search out something like a Witch. And they're going to Nomen of Cross out our set, which is kind of unfortunate. We kind of wanted that Witch search as well. But Sangan will be able to search us out a Man-Eater Bug here. We could have also searched like a Cyber Jar instead. But really the big issue was the Jinzo. So I feel fine just bringing out Man-Eater Bug. Maybe I don't know, maybe Gemini Alpha is also a big enough problem to warrant searching out a Cyber Jar. But they're just going to set one and pass back to us, which makes this a very worrying situation. So if they've got a Magician of Faith set, they can get back this Change of Heart and potentially just go for a lethal push here. As if that is Magician of Faith, then they'll have 4,600 damage on board already. And if we set something like Momonga, that will be 5,600. So I don't think we can actually afford to set Momonga here. If we set Man-Eater Bug and they've got like a Man-Eater Bug of their own, then they can clear the Man-Eater Bug. So I don't necessarily think we want to do that either. I think what we want to do actually is while their graveyard is empty, we want to set a Spear Cretin. So that way we can get value off of this and they can't. So it's a bit of a risky option here, but I think I do just go for the Spear Cretin and then set a Mystical Space Typhoon and pass back to them. If they've got heavy, which is unfortunate, but luckily, or I guess unluckily for us, they've got Man-Eater Bug. Doesn't look like they have an additional monster here, though, to go for lethal, which makes me feel very good. If we clear their current board of monsters, then we should be fine. They're going to set one pass back to us. We draw Raigeki! That is a great draw here. We're going to think about exactly what we want to do here, because what we could do first is summon out like Nimble Momonga, then Raigeki their board, and then attack in. We could also Mystical Space Typhoon their back row now, but if it is a Mystical Space Typhoon, then they can just snipe our Ceasefire, which obviously isn't the best. And given that they set it while they had Jinzo on field, it is potentially likely that it's a Mystical Space Typhoon. So I feel like I don't want to go for the blind MST. So it's a bit iffy. But I think I am just going to Raigeki the board away there. And I am just going to set the Momonga. If I summoned the Momonga and they brought out a Bazoo, then I just lose the game. So I think that setting the Momonga is the best play. Also, this gets us back some life points and swarms the field at a very valuable time to do that, as we are extremely low and we do really need to recover a bit. So we're going to pass back to them, and they are going to fire a Raigeki. Oh, that is brutal. We really wanted that Momonga. They're going to set one, pass back to us. Now, we have the read that the only reason that they would set here instead of attacking is if they've got like a Magician of Faith or a Man-Eater Bug, both of which would be pretty bad for us. So we're just going to fire a Ceasefire here. Maybe we should have done this when we had a monster on field to get a little bit more damage in, but I don't think we want to be vulnerable to Fissure. We want to use sort of like the element of surprise here, so that way they don't know exactly what our monster is. So we're just going to fire the Ceasefire now to prevent the flip effect, and I'm very glad we did that because that Magician of Faith would have been really bad for us. We're just going to set this Witch and then set a Justice Arts and pass back to them. As is, I feel pretty secure doing this, as it doesn't seem like they've got aggressive pressure here. And even if they do have some aggressive pressure, they'll have to attack into the Witch with that, and then we're only taking 300 off the Magician of Faith. So I feel okay about this. They're just going to set one and then set two and pass back to us, which means it's very likely that's a Morphing Jar. So we are going to draw here, and unfortunately, it is a Morphing Jar. But they've also got this Ceasefire here, and that Ceasefire will be the end of the game, as we are low enough that that will kill us. So maybe we should have fired a blind MST on their back row when they did this play. But I just figured they were setting due to the Morphing Jar, not necessarily because they had a Ceasefire as well. So I think it was fine just holding the MST. We were kind of in a losing situation no matter what happened here, as if we ever did get aggressive, since we had lost our Momonga earlier, we had no real way of getting back life points. So any of our like double-edged burn cards like Chain Energy would be really, really rough to play. So I think that we were kind of in a losing situation no matter what. But this game 3 was really intense and really cool, so I'm glad we got to play it. I think that games 1 and game 3 both showed that this deck really suffers once Jinzo hits the field. Oftentimes, you know, if you don't have an out to Jinzo, you just lose the game. And it's kind of unfortunate, but, you know, maybe this is something to keep in mind for the future. As, you know, Bazoo exists now as an out to Jinzo, so maybe it would be good to play one of those. Also, we could include more Man-Eater Bugs to deal with Jinzo as well. There are a couple different options here. Let me know down in the comments which one you think would potentially be best. And I think if we are swapping in some of these cards, then potential cut from the deck may actually be Spear Cretin. Spear Cretin's gotten a lot worse given things like Kaiku, being able to get rid of monsters in your graveyard. So I think maybe its time in the sun has passed a little bit, at least in the burn deck. I think it's still very good in like empty jar decks, but maybe in burn, it's just a bit too slow. But let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Spear Cretin did win us game 2, kind of, so, you know, maybe that's an argument for keeping it in. But I'm curious to hear what your takes on this deck are. This won't be the only burn deck that I'm covering this format. I'm definitely also going to cover the Fire Princess burn deck at some point in the future. But I do think this is probably the best sort of burn deck in the format, so I wanted to show it off first, as I do think it's pretty good. I think it's at least tier 2, if not tier 1. But let me know what you think about the deck in the comments below. I look forward to talking with you all as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.